after getting trained, so when we can work, like, and what position will be getting to start?
So you can start working as a business analyst, right? So
Business. Okay, sir. Then what about the QA, quality assurance?
so QA also, see, we are looking at from a functional testing point of view. Now,
Okay.
within QA, there are multiple type of roles again. So when we say
Yes.
testing, it's not just one role. So there would
Mm-hmm.
be, a dedicated team which is for testing the performance of the system, right? So there would be
Okay.
some teams which are, experts in automation, right? Now those are
Yeah.
specific tool-based focus trainings. Like, there would be
So,
some.
but whereas in the business analysis, what we have to do?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. So for a business analyst, you would primarily get involved from a functional testing point of
First,
view, right?
okay, testing part. Okay.
Yeah. So since you understand the requirements in detail, so you are
Uh-huh.
expected to, coordinate that functional testing and provide inputs
Mm.
on some defects, right? If something goes wrong or a defect is
So
identified.
yesterday you were showing about the positions, what we have to, whom we have to deal with, that all right?
Yes, yes. So this is the slide what I was referring to. And I've told you that there would be a QA team as well. There would be QA analyst as well. So are
Mm-hmm.
giving you, providing you the testing support, right? So while you
Uh-huh.
will not do the end-to-end testing, right? So there would be QA team, and you would play a role as well. So what is it that we would do? We'll discuss when we are talking about this, chapter 6, right? So that's where all the testing related topics would be covered, right? So for now, let's you know uh, just assume that where
Mm.
we would play a part in the testing, right? What exactly we do, we'll learn that later. Okay. Uh,
Okay.
yeah. So let's continue with the session. I think we have the for all the team joined in. Right. Uh, so yesterday we started off with figuring out who are all the key people we will interact with, and the most important one among them are the subject matter experts, the solution owner, whom you will interact with and then get your BID approved. And then there will be, interactions with the rest of them as well. But figure out, that the core team which is giving you the requirements is clearly identified, the subject matter expert, and who would approve your requirements, which is the solution or application owner. Okay. We also looked at RACA metrics, the way in which these, roles and responsibilities are documented, right? So sometimes, all you'll be given is this RACA metrics about the roles and what their involvement is. So you should be able to interpret it. So that's the reason we covered it. Then we looked at what documents we need. Primarily, you need one document which is telling that this is the scope of the system. Okay. So, once you have that view, I think you can, once you have that clear view of what exactly is the, scope of the project, you can actually, continue with your planning of the project, right? Now that scope would either be from one of these two documents. It could be an SOW if there is a vendor involved in it, like let's say Citibank is, outsourcing the project to Accenture. So Accenture would there would be a statement of work signed between Accenture and Citibank. So that is a contractual document which will clearly say that these are the 15, 20 features that has to be there as part of the system, right? In some cases, the client themselves handle it, right? Citibank would capture the requirements with in-house business analyst, right? You could be a business analyst in Citibank itself, and then you could be asked to work on this project. In that kind of situation, there is no SOW. Right, so there would be a business case document which should have been prepared earlier. It should have that list of features, right? As per that business case document. Okay, those are the two things that at least one of these two would be available, which lists down all your scope. And what are the deliverables coming out of that? You would have the list of all team members and their roles. Then you would have identified all the activities which would generally perform as a business analyst, which is basically understanding requirements, documenting them, communicating them, and uh, you know uh, uh, testing it as well, right? So these are the things that you as a business analyst report.
Can you please go back to the slide, which is the deliverables and input? Yeah, this one. So here I have a question. What do you mean by deliverables exactly? Like how am I related to deliverable? Do I need to make a documentation or something?
Yeah.
Or can you please give me?
Yeah. So this, see, the team members and the stakeholder list would be your SOW, sorry, the RSA matrix, or maybe a document listing down that, there would, this person, John Doe, would be the subject matter expert, and his responsibility would be to, give the detailed requirements, and you're clearly identifying the each of every uh,
So whose role is that to defining all these things? Do I need
it would
to
be the
do
project
I?
managers. Right?
Oh,
So the
okay.
project manager has to identify. See, I've told you in the first slide, sir, right? So for you, make sure that you identify the key people for your project, right? So
Right.
you would have to interact with the subject matter experts, the solution owner. You just make
Right.
sure that you are aware of that. But usually, listing down these key people and their roles and responsibility would be the project manager's responsibility. Okay, but that would be coming out as a part of your planning phase. So sometimes he would take help of a business analyst also to get it done. So I wouldn't say no, it's a hard and fast rule that it has to be a project manager or a business analyst. So that comes out as a deliverable as part of the planning. Right? So the list of all team members who are involved in the project and what is their responsibilities. Okay,
Okay.
so you'll work towards that, and then you would have identified all your activities that you are going to do and the work breakdown structure as well. Right? So that is important. Based on the number of features or functionality that the system is offering, you'd come up with a detailed work breakdown structure and then the schedule as well. Okay. Uh, then you'd also identify what tools you would gather, what tools you would use, right? Like for capturing the requirements, you could use a use case framework. For understanding the requirements, you could use a workshop and prototyping, right? Now, at this point in time, we will not be able to, you know, uh, understand that because we have not gone through those phases. Right? So we don't know what are the tools available to capture our requirements, um, to engage our SMEs, right? So all that tools you'll be able to understand only after we complete the course. Okay, because
Okay.
uh, there are dependencies. Okay,
Right.
so that's the deliverables coming out. So like I mentioned, the tools and techniques would be covered later in the course, right? So what tools will be used for documentation, for elicitation, what are the techniques? All that would be covered as part of the course. But for now, we just need to uh, ensure that these are the things that would happen as part of the plan. Okay. Then we I think we stopped somewhere here where I was talking about the work breakdown structure, and we covered a part of it. Okay, let's continue from here. So broadly, you'd create a work breakdown structure. Hmm. Right? So which has this view, right? So broadly, any project you pick, this would be the structure in which your activities would happen, right? So you would first understand and document the requirements. This would take the significant amount of time. So the first task, right? On a day-to-day basis, you will go talk to the customer or create work, conduct workshops, or you will engage him in multiple ways, but understand the requirement is part of it. And what do? You also start documenting it. So it won't be like you first understand all requirements and then start documentation. Both will be simultaneously done. So we'll identify that as one single task. Okay. So your typical day here would be maybe a couple of hours you will spend with the customer understanding the requirements, and the rest of the day you'd spend documenting that. Okay. So that's your requirement elicitation and documentation. Then once all your requirements are captured, then you would submit that document, the business requirements document, to the client for review. Okay. So the responsibility for creating and submitting the BRD would be the business analyst. the subject matter experts and then the solution owner would review these requirements. Right? So whatever you have documented, you would review the subject matter experts and the solution owner. Basically the client team, the business team would review that, and then if they have any feedback, they would let you know, and then you can start updating that feedback. Finally, if they're okay with all the changes that you have made, they're good with the requirement, they would approve it. Right? So this is the generic structure in which your requirement activities happen. Okay. Now, depending on the scope of the system, how many features or functionality the system has, your first activity could be elaborated. Right? So we call that as a work breakdown structure. So we're effectively saying that my system has these 5 requirements, right? And I'm picking up each requirement and then figuring out how much time it would take. Right? A user registration might take me 2 days to understand and capture the requirement. Logging into an application would take another 2 days. Checking an account balance functionality might take me 3 days. Right? Transferring of funds would overall take 5 days because it would involve both transfer within the bank and outside the bank. So 2 days for one and 3 days for another one. So overall, transferring of funds would take another 5 days, and paying the utility bills takes me another 5 days. Right? So this is how you can, clearly break down your task and then create the work breakdown structure. Now, why do we do this? Because we would get closer to the estimates. So if you just ask me how much time would it take to capture the requirements for mobile banking app, right? It's difficult to answer. It might take me 15 days or 20 days or 30 days, I don't know, because it's difficult. But if I break it down and then say, what, okay, mobile banking has this 5 features, and if I look at each feature, then it's easier to tell for a smaller activity how much it takes than the overall bigger activity, right? So user registration, you can say, okay, broadly it might require 2 discussions of 2 hours each, and then I'll have to spend time documenting the requirement for 2 days. So overall, I could do it in 2 days, right? So the way you would estimate it again would be based on your experience and your understanding of the functionality. So sometimes you could take help from the SMEs also to arrive at this detail. Okay. So broadly, do you understand how to create this work breakdown structure and how it's done? I think somebody had some questions on this yesterday. So just wanted to make sure that you guys understood it. So clear on this?
Yes.
Okay. So along with that, you'd also capture the start and end date, right? So you have to say that your requirements are going to start on this day, and then so it would be like, let's say your requirements registration starts on 1st April. So let's say with the user registration, so it's starting on 1st April. So it's taking 2 days. So I'll take 2 more days here. So right. So if you look at it, there would also be weekends, right? So 1st is a Friday. So 1st and 4th is when it should end, right? So because Saturdays and Sundays will not work. So you'll have to add that details as well. Let's say, yeah. So it would end on 4th, right? So then the next activity would start on 5th, and then this would take another 2 days, right? So you start on 5th and complete it on actually 6th, right? So plus 1 day, since 5th and 6th will be covered, right? Right? Then on 7th you would start this another requirement and end it on 9th, 7th, 8th, 9th, right? Or rather, it should have been 11th. Right? So basically, you will create something like this. You'll figure out the schedule as well, right? And another most important thing, you will identify the dependencies. Okay. Now, when you are capturing your requirements, some of them could be dependent on one another. Okay. Like maybe for capturing the requirements for logging into an app, you might first want to capture the requirements for user registration, right? Unless you know what details, how you are registering, what is a user ID, are you going with a user ID password or a PIN number, right? So your login functionality would not be clear. So logically, it makes sense. First, you capture the requirements of user registration, and then go to the login of the application, right? So we can create that dependencies and list it. So before capturing the requirements for login to app, you should have captured the requirements for user registration. So I'm listing down that dependency. Similarly, before you submit the BRD, you should have completed your requirement elicitation and documentation. Unless you complete this activity 1, where your BRD is created, you cannot submit to the client for review, right? Similarly, the client cannot review until you have submitted the BRD, right? So only after you submit, the client would review. So update the feedback might go parallel to your requirements. So it might not be dependent on 3, right? So I mean, while reviewing, you can also start updating. It may not be that only after 30th April that this guy business analyst can start updating, right? And finally, it can be updated. The BRD can be approved only after all the feedback has been updated, right? So you're basically listing down all your dependencies and also identifying who are the people who are working on each of these tasks. So these are the inputs which should generally go into a project plan, right? So a typical project plan, if you look at it, would look something like this. Okay. So you'd have all the task list and the work breakdown structure, the detailed task list as well. So this is the high level task, and then this is the work breakdown structure. Then you have the duration, the start and end date, the dependencies, the predecessors. Like you can map related processes to best practices only after task 23 is completed. What is task 23? You have to review the current process. So unless you have reviewed the processes, you could not have mapped it to the best practices, right? So you'll come up with this view. Okay, so this is called as a task grid, and then it's also shown in a pictorial view, right? So if you actually fill in the task grid, the pictorial view would come in automatically. So this is called as a Gantt chart. It pictorially tells us what is a task that is that we're doing, and the work breakdown structure also. If you look at the gray bars, these are the high level tasks, and the blue bars are the work breakdown structure. Okay, and then the arrows you see are showing us the dependencies, which means this particular task here. So this particular task here can start only after this is completed. Right? Rather it should be the other way. So this will be completed, and then you can start this. Right? Similarly, this can start only after this is completed. Right? So this can start after this is completed. So all those dependencies are also coming out in this Gantt chart view. So you can easily figure out, rather than go through this list, it gives you a much easier way of understanding how the activities are performed. Okay. So
I have one question on this. Like, I mean, is there any specific tool used to prepare this, or it can be just done in Excel? Because even Agile.
Yeah, most organizations use Microsoft Project for this. We call that as MPP, right? But again, there are some freewares also. Like what you're looking at is a screenshot from a freeware, right? Now, again, you are not going to use and prepare the project plan. Right? So you could just give your inputs in an Excel sheet. The business analyst, the project manager would own up the complete project plan, and then he would create this.
Okay, fine. Because if I'm not wrong, even in Agile, rather, what is that? Jira, there is also this kind of thing which can be done, right?
Yes. So Jira has a Gantt chart view, but we don't prepare project plans for agile. It's mostly
Okay.
the product backlog, what we call it as. So the terms are
Mm-hmm.
different, and the process is also a little different. So I'll explain
Okay.
when we talk about agile, the Scrum
Okay.
model, right?
Okay.
It's called
Thank
as a product model, and we capture the details that way,
you.
right?
Okay.
Yeah. So coming back to this, so broadly, this is how your planning exercise would go on. So you might, so you would only contribute to the requirement related activities, right? So you will not know what a design, work breakdown structure would be and all those details. You will not have those details, right? And you are not expected to contribute to that as well. Okay. So yeah. So that's first thing that you would do as part of a requirements management. Then once a plan is the detailed plan is prepared, and both the project managers agree that okay, now we are good with the plan, then you would go on to the next activity, which is the requirement elicitation and definition documentation. Okay, but before doing that, while the project managers are figuring out the planning session, there are a few more things that are agreed upon. First, the way in which the scope is managed, the way in which the changes to the requirements are managed, and the way the risks are managed. Right? Now, these are ongoing activities. Your scope could change at any point in time. There could be changes to the requirements coming at any point in time in the project. Right? So maybe even when you are doing your development, when the programmers are writing the programs based on the BRD that you have captured, the SME could come out to you and then ask, what, I want this requirement changed, right? So how do you handle that request? Are you going to just change the requirement and ask the um, developer to code it differently, or how are you going to handle that change? So you need to know that structure, the mechanism. There is a standard, well-known process, uh, you know, which would be used um, uh, for change management. You need to understand that as well, right? And then there would be multiple risks related to the project. Okay, so primarily, since you are handling all the requirements related activities, any risk related to that, you'll have to capture them as well. So you need to understand that risk management approach as well. So all these frameworks are agreed as part of the project charter. So during the planning phase itself, you agree on all these frameworks, and ensure that you follow it throughout your project. So let's spend some time understanding how do we manage the scope, the changes, and risk of the project as well. So let's go one step by step. So let's focus today's session on scope management. Scope, or I will also call it as requirements management. Okay. Now, uh, I think during the late 90s or so, there was a study which was done about the success rates of projects. Right, a lot of projects failed because the requirements or scope was not managed properly. Right, so I think the Standish report or something which mentions this, which highlights the importance of why it's required to manage the scope and changes to the project. Now, logically thinking as well, right? So let's say you agreed to do 10 things in your project, right? And the customer comes in later and then adds, okay, I need 2 more things. So obviously, it could take you more effort, it could take you more time to complete that project, right? So instead of doing 10 things, now if you have agreed to do 12 things, obviously you should charge more and should get some additional time to accommodate those changes, right? Now, a lot of times that doesn't happen. If the customer comes and asks, the business analyst just takes the requirements and then updates it, and that creates a problem, right? So overall, how do you ensure that whatever you have committed to the customer is delivered, and whatever you have not committed is handled in a more methodical way, other than just haphazard way of just adding it ad hoc additions at any point in time? You need to manage that in a more structured way, right? So how do we do that, and what all activities constitute these requirements and scope management is what we would spend some time on, right? Now, the reason we do this is because it affects your overall success of the project, right? So your profitability of the project would be hit if you are increasing your effort, if you're increasing your scope, right? So you cannot do that. And changes are inevitable, right? So at any point, any project you pick, there will definitely be some change requests coming in, right? But so you cannot say no to them because your profitability will be hit. So how do we handle it? How do you make both the parties win-win and get into a win-win situation? So that's what we would learn in this session. Okay. So if I have to clearly summarize what is it this managing scope or requirements is, I would say, what? If I have 10 things that I have agreed initially, right? So 10 features I have agreed in the system. Okay. I'll make sure that all those 10 features are delivered. So that's one part of the scope management. Okay. All 10 which are agreed upon has to be delivered in your final system. Second thing, you'll not pick up anything more than that. If anything more than that has to be picked up, then that has to be separately handled as a, if anything additional comes in, then it has to be handled as a change request, and then appropriate funding, and then timelines also have to be adjusted to accommodate for that. Okay, so scope management includes two things. Whatever I committed, I will deliver. Whatever I've not committed, I'll not just accept it like that. It has to go through a change management process. So these are the two things I would say is the two things that we would do as part of scope management, right? So if you have committed, we would deliver it, and if you have not committed, we will not deliver it, and it has to go through a change management process, right? So how do we do this? So there are some ways in which you could actually engage them. Okay. First step that you would what you need to do is to baseline your documents, right? Now, how do you know that you have committed this, right? So you have committed this for these 10 features, right? So ideally, you would look at it maybe your SOW or your business case document. Make sure that okay, we committed for these 10 features. So let's capture the details into the requirements document and ensure that it gets delivered, right? So having that reference, point of reference, saying that, okay, SOW we agreed on 10, so my requirements document will have 10 features. And since your BRD or the requirements document has 10 features, your design document will also have 10 features. So we are ensuring that there is a baseline. So everything points down to your SOW. Right? So ideally, you should fix to your SOW and then say, now whatever we agreed in the SOW, I will definitely deliver that. Anything additionally coming in will go through a change management process. Right? So that should be your approach. So for doing this, make sure that you agree onto the baseline document. Right? So during your requirements phase, the SOW is the baseline document. Right? So when you're capturing the detailed requirements, SOW will become the baseline document. After the BRD is prepared, so during the requirements phase, you would have prepared the BRD, right? So after the customer signs off the BRD, then BRD becomes the baseline document. If something is there in the BRD, then it's delivered. Otherwise, it has to go through the change request. So your point of reference is a BRD now. So the baseline is a BRD document. Right? A very simple step. It will ensure you that you're in line with what was agreed upon earlier. If you don't baseline this document and have that point of reference, it will be a lot more trouble for you to have that discussions with the customer, whether it's in scope or out of scope. It will create a lot of confusion. Okay, so a very simple step. I mean, you logically think also. I think it makes sense, right? So you don't really need to know as a business analyst and all. So what if the customer comes and says, I want these additional things coming in. So you could always say, no, earlier we agreed to these, 10 features in the SOW. So, I'll deliver only 10. So anything additional you want, you have it to raise it as a change request. Right? So effectively, what you're doing is you are, creating a mechanism to make sure that you are not accepting anything which are more than what you've committed by defining this baseline document. A very simple step, right? So that's the main reason, when I was talking about the earlier slide also, I said first make sure that you have these documents in place. Now imagine a situation where you don't have an SOW in place and you have gone for your requirements, right? Now the customer could keep on telling you whatever he wants, right? You could end up with some 100 features or even 1,000 features. How do you know that you've committed for that? So let's say you've committed for $1 million for these 10 features, right? Now what if the customer comes up with 20 features during the requirements? Unless you have this point of reference, you can say, you know what, we agreed to these 10 features, so let's stick to that. And anything else, we'll have to relook at the cost and then the timelines for the project, right? So that argument would not be valid unless you have baseline these documents, right? So first thing, before you start your requirements, make sure that you have an SOW which clearly says that this is the list of features that has to be developed. And at a later point also, the customer could come back and then say, I want changes to this requirement, right? So let's say when you're doing the development, or maybe when you're testing it, the customer would say, you know what, I don't want it in this way, change the way you want it, change the way in which this feature should work, right? Then you can always refer to the BRD and then say, you know what, we agreed in the BRD that this is how it would be done. Now if it wants to be changed, then it has to be a change request. Okay, so the baseline document would help you put forward your argument. You can always say, no, we agreed on this, let's stick to this. Anything else comes up, it will be a change request.
Actually, I just missed the full form of SOW. What?
Statement of work.
Statement of work.
Yeah. Okay. So it is basically a project-specific contract document. Now, let's say, let's take the example, Citibank and Accenture are there, right? Now, Citibank is awarding the project to Accenture. Okay. Now, there needs to be a contractual document, right, for this particular project. So that document is called as a SOW. Now, in the SOW, what you will say is that, I would do all these things. Accenture would do all these things, and I would pay him this amount, and it would be delivered in these timelines. And these are the terms and conditions of the engagement. All that project-specific details are captured in the SOW. Okay. All right. So it's basically a contractual document which has been signed by the client and the vendor, right? And it clearly tells what is it that we have agreed upon to deliver, what are the timelines, what are the costs. All those details are captured as part of your statement of work. Okay. So make sure that when you are elaborating your requirements into the BRD, you are aligned to that. Okay. If you have committed 10 features, you are delivering 10. Yeah.
Okay, one more question. This change management, what you are telling, I understood it, but what is scope creep? I mean, does it change management and scope creep is same terminology?
No, scope creep is different. I'll explain that. Now, change management, we haven't discussed it yet. How do we enforce a change coming into the project? We have not discussed that. I'll discuss that later. Okay. So there's a whole. I'll also take you through the template and we'll understand it in detail. But so we are not just accepting the change, we are enforcing that change management process. So that's what I meant here, right? Now,
but if there is a change, then of course the budget allocation and everything would be done for it, but again then we have to go through the process of SOW and BRD and all.
So that is where your change management process would come in. So if instead of 10, you are adding 2 more features, right? So you don't have to go through an SOW and then again planning and all that. So there would be a change request for that, right? So I'll explain that process. So in the next slide, I'll talk about the change management. So that's the main reason I was just referring that there would be a change management framework to handle that. Okay, I'll explain that in the later slide. Okay, so you also brought in a term, scope creep, right? So that's again the jargon which we use. If you don't manage your scope properly, right, you tend to deliver a lot more than what has been agreed upon, right? So that is called a scope creep. Now I'll take a small scenario and then I think it becomes more real. So you agreed for these 10 features for your system. Okay. Now the customer comes in and then say, you know what, I want these two things to be added, right? And you don't have a change management process. Let's assume, okay. He would say, no, during the requirements phase, can you please add in these two features, okay? Then since you don't have a baseline document or a change management process, you will accept it. Okay, let me do that as well, right? You don't know the implications, how much effort this would take or how much time it would take. You have not considered all that yet, right? Then during the design phase, you would come back and then say, you know what, modify these three requirements, right? So if you are not managing your scope properly, right, you are actually doing a lot more work. So you have agreed for 10 things, now you are doing 5 additional things, right? So it would have cost you like $1 million for this, 10 features, and now you are adding some additional requirements to this as well, delivering within that 1 million. So obviously your project would fail. You will get into losses. Why? Because there is no account of these 5 features being. There is no way you have identified the effort and then the cost for these 5 features, right? So this way in which, if you are not managing the scope properly, there is a tendency that people keep on adding features to your scope, and that is called a scope creep, right? Scope is increasing, it's creeping and increasing to a larger extent, and that's a word what scope creep means, right? So which is not good for the project. So if you are not managing the scope properly, it leads to scope creep. Okay, clear about that term now? All right, so yeah, we looked at the first thing that we need to do, which is the baselining of the document, right? Now it's a very simple activity, though it might sound a little complicated and all. It just, we have that point of reference. We agreed on that document, that 10 features, so I'll stick to that 10 features. Any changes, initiate the change management process. Okay, it's as simple as that. So during our requirements phase, our point of reference or the baseline document would be the statement of work. After the BRD is signed off, generally the BRD is considered as a baseline document. If it is there in the BRD, you would deliver it. If it is not there in the BRD, you will not deliver it. Okay, so that's the first way of managing the scope. Okay, usually you also have to ensure that with a lot of times people focus only on the system that you are developing. Okay, sometimes you'll have to integrate with external systems also. So some data would come in some external system. Unless you change that system, create that interface, right, your system would not be successful. So people tend to limit their scope only to the development of the system and exclude that external systems impact, right? Now this is again a word of caution that you should consider all those for the system and the ecosystem around it as well, to make sure that the system is developed completely, right? So you don't miss out on some changes. It should not be like that, I'm expecting this set of data from other system for my project to for my application to work, right? But who is developing that feature for extracting that data? Nobody is doing it. So even after you develop your system, right? So that if that data is not coming from the other system, it's your system is a failure, right? So you have to consider that external systems as well when you're identifying the scope. All right. So that's another way you would manage the scope. Okay. Traceability and the change management. I'll cover that. What is the time now? Okay. So I'll take up these two topics in tomorrow's session. Let me talk about the approvals. Right. Now these are simple ways. The traceability and change management are very important. So I just don't want to take that in a hurry. That's the reason I'm parking it for tomorrow. Right. Now.
Yeah, I have a question. say for example, there's you said like 10 features in BRD and everything is done, like project started and everything happened, and all of a sudden he comes back and he say, okay, add two features to that. So
Right.
in this scenario, how the technical team is involved, meaning how the I mean, from their side, do we have to have a meeting along with the technical team, and how do you guys manage that?
So that exactly is covered in the change management process. So when such requests come, what should you do? So that is clearly explained in the change management process.
Oh, okay,
right?
cool.
So I'll explain that, how to handle when such a request comes in, how can you politely refuse just taking it at that point in time, and ensuring that the change management process initiated. We'll cover that in detail in tomorrow. So that's the reason I'm saying, I'll cover that in detail in tomorrow's session, because I don't want to do that in a hurry, right?
Okay.
It's again an important interview question as well. So if you're looking at this scope management, broadly there could be some 3-4 questions. What are the ways in which you could manage the scope? You say, no, you should baseline your documents, you should get your approvals, should trace your requirements, you should enforce a change management process. So you can talk broadly about these topics, right? So that's one question. There could be specific questions, what is traceability, or explain me the change management process, right? So these could be 3 or 4 questions which could be asked on this particular topic, right? And usually it's important topic, and from the planning side, this is one question which you could definitely expect in the interviews. If somebody wants to check whether this person has experience on managing the scope and all, he would want to test it by asking these questions. Okay. So we'll cover the traceability and change management in tomorrow's session. The final one is maintaining the scope approval, right? Now, this again is a very simple step, right? Now, let's assume that you have captured your requirements into the BRD and then given it to the architect for designing, even before the the customer has signed off, right? So customer has not provided any formal approval. So you said, okay, it's good to go. You go ahead and then develop it. Okay. So you would go ahead even without the customer approval, design and develop it, and then take it to the customer for testing. Now, if the customer does not like it, or if you want to make some change to it, you would say that make this change, right? Now, if you ask him, okay, it's we agreed into the BRD in this way. Now you're specifying a different way. Let's initiate the change management. If you say that, the guy would say that I didn't approve the requirements, right? So you cannot enforce your baseline and your change management unless you have taken the formal approvals from the customer, right? So the customer could come back and then say, I didn't even approve that requirement. Why did you develop it? Now do it my way, right? So you need to have that formal approval from the customer, you need to have that commitment from the customer saying that, what, we have agreed onto this, way of managing the scope. We have agreed onto this requirement, right? And this is exactly what you have to deliver, right? You have taken that approval by formally signing off the BRD or approving the change request which is coming later as part of the change management process, right? So you're getting a firm commitment from the customer. So you can be rest assured that he will not go back on his word. He will not say that, okay, no, I didn't approve it and all, because you have a written proof, right? Now this approval could actually, so some organizations enforce actually taking a printout and then formally signing it off. Some organizations, approve a email approval, right? So you need to figure out what is the process which is followed in the organization and stick to that. Make sure that you get all your requirements, what is documented in your BRD, formally approved. Okay, that means the client is either sending out an email or taking a hard copy printout and then signing it on the paper, right? Make sure that you adhere to that organization standards and get that approval. Okay. Similarly, when some requirement changes also, you'll have to, agree on to that, the change request what has been coming up, right? Otherwise, you'll not be able to, back up or defend your documents, whatever you have developed, right? So you'll fall flat, and then the customer said, I didn't approve. You go back and change it now. So you'll have to change it. Okay. So very simple things. Your baselining documents, your scope approvals are very simple things to do, but a lot more effective. Right? So they're very effective when it comes to managing your scope of the project. Right? So make sure that you follow that sacrosanctly. Right? So you should not miss it out at either the baselining your documents or taking a formal approval at the end of the project. In fact, in most of the projects, this would be a definite checklist that as a exit criteria for your requirements. Getting the approval is an exit criteria. Unless you do this, you cannot start the design activity. Some organizations enforce it as a policy, but even if it's not done, make sure that you take that approval. Okay. So that's on to the scope and scope management. So we still have to look at the traceability and then the change management.